So, President Norris is on
her way.
Okay. Vice President Herron.
Here.
Secretary Spikers.
Here.
And Commissioner Young.
Absent, excuse.
And Commissioner Pollard.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll go for the approval of the agenda.
And I'll second.
Did you move to approve?
Yes,
Made a
I
motion, I
moved.
second. Okay, all in favor
All in favor?
of the agenda?
Aye.
Aye.
Carried.
Thank you.
Okay, and topics to discuss here. We are going to due diligence summary updates. These are the topics to be discussed this evening. Definitive agreement, land and building leases, lease transferences, trust, certificate of need, timeline check. So those are the topics for this evening. And I'd like to call Mr.
Can you jump in and do
Yes,
it,
please.
sir?
Yeah.
All right.
Sorry about that, Dr.
No, I just thought I could launch. All right, thank you, Emma. So as Steve and I thought about, I couldn't find you. Steve and I kind of thought about what's the best way to make sure that you all as commissioners really stay engaged and really informed and keep the information flowing to you timely. So what we've done is construct this agenda here. And so each time we meet for the work study, the affiliation work study, this is exactly what the agenda will look like, just every single time. And so once Brian has had a chance to go through the timeline, it will make sense to you.
Okay.
But we even intentionally designed it so it has boxes so that you can take notes in it and so that your notes stay associated with the topic. But that's what's in front of you. But the real purpose of tonight, or this afternoon, excuse me, is really to kind of introduce the big picture to you. And so Brian, thank you so much for coming from the great state of Michigan, next to the better state of Minnesota, right? And so Brian's really going to walk us through kind of the big picture, starting from the timeline. Take it away.
All right. Well, thanks. It's good to see everyone again. It's good to be out here. We have spent a fair amount of time, Dr. Whitcup, Steve, and I, as well as the folks from Overlake. We had at least one conversation where we went over all of this. With an affiliation, it's always important to try and keep your arms around all the moving pieces, making sure everything's getting done and moving along so that you don't get partway through the process and go, oh, whoa, wait, we forgot about this, or who's handling that. So this sort of time frame to me is always useful. We started with this one, even though you have one, it's getting large enough, you can see this, 23 tasks, and based on some recent legislation or proposed legislation here in the state of Washington, probably need to add a fourth item. Dealing with potential, we can talk more about it another time or today, whichever, but proposed legislation in the state that would basically call for the Attorney General, State Attorney General's review and approval of any affiliation similar to this, if we don't get it done before December 31 of this year. So just something to keep in mind. So these are 23 tasks. I threw it up here just to start it off, because at least for me, it's always useful to see the big picture and how it all flows together. And obviously, there's a lot to get done. Things start really kind of gearing up this month and running through September. I mean, between now and September, there's a lot to get done. And so, again, this is, I think, helpful. Now, you'll see in a couple of these, the bars are different shaded. Item number 10, kind of in the middle there, just above the middle, has the 3s. That's the certificate of need approval process. Starts with filing a letter of intent, which has to be in place 30 days before you can file the application. So I have color-coded or shaded just to show the process. And then there's a few items that once the application's done, it's really in somebody else's hands and we're waiting for the approval process. So to me, this helps. any suggestions you all have that make it work better for you, and make it helpful to you, let me know, and I'll certainly work those in. Because, this is a tool for, obviously, everyone that's working on this affiliation from our side, as well as everyone that's working on the affiliation from the Overlake side.
So based on this, Brian, will we be able to, say in a few months, say where are we at on this bar, on this bar, on this bar?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, that's part of the reason I like doing it. I mean, one is, like I said, I don't want to lose track of something, but the other is, these things sometimes just can languish if you don't have some timelines and go, all right, now stuff happens, and you might say, well, we plan to get this done by May 15th, and it's gonna be June 15th. All right, well, stuff happens. But what I don't want to have happen is we blow through deadlines because nothing's happening. If something comes up, but otherwise, if nobody's responsible for the project, if nothing's getting done, this allows us to hold each other accountable. Not so much each other in this room, but the two parties, Overlake and Snoqualmie. So yes, that's the purpose, or one of the purposes.
On item 10 was certificate of need. Now we have a certificate of need with Overlake. This is a separate certificate of need, isn't it?
It'll be specifically for this transaction. This transaction that we're contemplating will require certificate of need approval.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And what I was more interested in is actually the letter of intent, the LOI. We already have an LOI with Overlake. Now, does this require an LOI for the Department of Health?
Yes. I'm glad you asked that, because when I was putting this together, I thought about that. It's like, yeah, there's really two LOIs. There's the transaction LOI that this board approved and was signed back in mid-March, and there is actually a letter of intent to file an application for the certificate of need process.
So do we ourselves, does SVH file for that certificate of need with state, or is it Overlake?
It'll be Overlake.
Ourselves?
It'll be Overlake.
Also, Overlake will have.
Overlake will file for the
Will file?
certificate of need?
Yeah.
Don't we have to file?
Well, we have to participate. What the certificate of need process is going to include, because what needs to be approved by the CON process is the transaction. And so in order to move this along, we have to have the affiliation agreement, the leases, and the trust agreement pretty much in place. So the CON commission can go, all right, looked at the arrangement, we're approving the arrangement.
But don't both parties have to apply for this?
They have to be a part of it, but I guess I took your question to be who's gonna drive it, and it would be Overlake. They would be the ones doing a lot of the work on that.
But the CON will apply to SVH, not
Yes.
Overlake, even though they are applying for it.
It's the transaction,
Okay.
it's the affiliation transaction, and that's what they're going to be called on to review and approve.
I have a question for Commissioner Powell. Do you foresee anyone, perhaps some of your constituents, if you're familiar with having any kind of appeals process and slowing this down?
It depends on what is developed and how much communication goes on with the public. I think one of the things that we should consider is we're all here. The people that, number one, own the hospital and are going to be most impacted by this are the people. And yet, the only thing I can see that's proposed is a town meeting after everything's in place. There's no participation of the public during the policy formulation process.
It is intentionally timed so that we're able to have something to share, and then but not be done yet, so that we can receive. Yeah, it's very intentional. In fact, and if Brian jumps into, he's kind of had a presentation that takes each of these steps, and a lot of that's.
I'm just concerned if we put, $500,000 into this and then someone delays this enough to push Opal Lake out and it's a frivolous appeal.
No, we
And
don't
I
want
would
that.
be really ticked off
Yeah.
about it, and, to the point where, you know, if I knew the people ahead of time, they could come in and talk with us or talk to the
Yeah, I
commissioners
think that would be
and the
best.
staff. Because I don't want that happening, I don't want to blow $500,000.
Well, the public has certain rights under
They
state
do,
law.
but I don't want to see a frivolous appeal either by somebody that, you know, that may not know all of that.
Frivolous is in the eye of the beholder.
But the serious one who may have a claim should be coming forward if that is the case in order for us to.
I would like to have us have an open discussion about some of the practical features, like one of the things I'm concerned about is who would be in charge of admissions? Would that be us, or the new board, or Overlake, since Overlake is in charge of
Operations is over.
then they might be in charge of admissions.
They would be.
Then we have some issues there that we need to discuss.
Such as what kind of issues?
Well, I don't really want to get into this now, but I think we need to have a free-flowing information about possible problems. We need to foresee and forestall any possible problems in this.
Well, that's why I'm calling on you to help us out in that regard, to talk to the constituents that you might think that might be.
I'm not going to be responsible for the entire public, but the public is going to have some questions about this.
Yeah,
Some are going to consider we've been tricked again. Many people in this community feel they were tricked in the building of this hospital. Because the only time they had to vote, they voted 69% against.
We don't want to go into the past.
Well, let
I'm
me
just
finish
saying.
my sentence, please.
Well, that's not, I would
They voted 69% against building a new hospital. That's the only time they've had an opportunity to vote, and some people are still bitter about that.
I understand that. My point is that the last delay on appeal cost us over $1 million in interest.
I don't think so.
Well over $1 million. So that's what I'm worried about and concerned about right now. So let's put it on the table right now.
Right,
Because
and
if
I
it
think
happens, it's not going to, it will totally ruin this hospital.
Anybody who's a commissioner, as well as a member of the public, and anybody with standing has the right to appeal.
And that's, I
And that's
think,
the state law.
exactly, Commissioner Pollard, we are going to really put this forward. And for those who are seriously having an issue, we are the representatives. So if we hurt someone, why Commissioner Spiker's asking that they can come and share that.
Yes, that's
Concern
what I'd like.
with
We'd like to
us.
see transparency and have
But
these
yeah,
particular
not
people
behind the
come to the
scenes.
meetings.
We don't want any behind the scenes. So
One of the
let's-
problems we've got is the Valley Record has changed. It's become a regional newspaper. They never wrote a single story about the hospital going into $1 million in debt. They don't write about the hospital, and I know the reasons why. But unless the people have information about what's going on, and it's been usually through the Valley Record, they won't know to ask questions or come to meetings or.
Can I ask you then to be our ambassador for your constituents that contact you?
No, what do you mean, my constituents?
Well, people that contact you about the hospital.
These are members of the public. They may contact me, they may not. I'm just saying that unless people have more information about this, they're going to feel like, once again, we've been tricked. So we need a free-flowing information about all of this. I'm very concerned that the first, I know you gave an explanation, but the first town meeting is after everything is in place. Maybe we're not seeing, I think we've got to approach this with an open mind, even now. And that is, if we are already committed to doing this regardless, then we don't have an open mind. We need to look at this. If it's a good deal for the public, if it meets our strategic objectives, then that's one thing. If it doesn't, that's another. We need to be open-minded. This may or may not work out. If we're gonna say, regardless of how this develops, we're going to go through this, and we're going to affiliate with Overlake, that's not
I
open-minded.
couldn't agree with you more. I just want to make sure that people that have any issues that you may think might have issues, we come forward and get the direct facts and not something that is didactic down the way that causes a problem and leaves people not doing dollars.
And that's what openness is about. We want to be forthcoming. If there have some
Yes,
questions,
we want to be
come, please,
forthcoming.
you are
So
invited.
you think that doing a town hall meeting sooner would be?
I think
productive?
there should be a very early meetings so that the public even knows this is in consideration. This is, the public doesn't know a thing about this because the Valley Record is not doing its job.
As Brian goes through the overlay, will you kind of think about where you think would be a good time to insert an earlier town hall so
I'd
we
like
can
to have
grab
one
it?
within a couple of weeks as a start and let people know that this process has begun and we'd like their feedback on what they think of the idea. Because, you know, Overlake did a nice pitch the other night, but they're not listed as one of the top 5 hospitals in this area anymore. And I personally had an experience with them within the last 3 months where I've told people, just between us, I don't want to ever be taken to Overlake unless it's an extremely unusual situation. Because of the experience I had, 24-hour experience I had at Overlake, I consider it a poor hospital. So, you know, that's where I'm coming from.
I'm sorry, Brian, I had to bring this up
Oh,
because
no,
it's kind of
it's-
something that's been on my mind.
Oh,
with
absolutely.
the certificate of needs and things. I don't want to go through what has happened in the past and blow tons of money for no reason, really. And this is going to be something that comes out. I think that the hospital's going to be dead in the water. So,
Why would we be dead in the water to have communications with the public about this
you
whole project?
want me to go through all of our financial records the last 5 years with you? It would take you about 6 hours, but I'd be happy to do that, Gene.
I don't know what you're talking about, but I do know that.
So we just, maybe, can we just have Mr. Brian to
I do know that
for now,
your vote
Yeah.
Was for cutting our sale of the old hospital in half, and we lost $10 to $14 million.
I would object at this time that it's not a point we're talking about past issues here.
Well, here, you're talking about, you're threatening past issues
No,
yourself.
I'm threatening because I'm talking about frivolous issues.
Yeah, well,
That is the same issue that's coming up as affiliation and certificate of need. The certificate of need needs to be approved. And if there is an appeal, that could probably, my guess is, somebody's probably gonna pull out. And it won't be us, it'll probably be over there. So if that happens, it's gonna be on whoever facilitates or tries to push for an appeal. And if it's a commissioner on this board, I wouldn't want them to be a commissioner.
can we table that for now and let's proceed with the PowerPoint? Let's,
I think we should proceed.
Okay.
let's proceed, please.
I consider these
Okay,
comments inappropriate.
Mr. Brian.
All right, well, as I mentioned, you know, right now in that timeline, in that project timeline, we've got 23 different affiliation tasks or projects identified, and the whole purpose is just, you know, get them out there, not lose track of them, and set a target completion date. Again, sometimes stuff comes up, it delays it, but oftentimes what happens if you don't have these, it just kind of languishes, you know? It's always the tyranny of the urgent, something else is driving it rather than this. So that's why we did this. Now, we have the 23 tasks identified. First one, letter of intent, as you're aware, that got signed back March 15th and March 18th respectively by the parties. Where we are now is in the due diligence request process. And what I wanted to do was take a little bit of time to talk about each of these tasks, give you initial familiarity with it, and so as we start rolling through them, you have that basic, and then we can dive down a little deeper. So the document request phase, number 2, task number 2, is we've requested a series of documents that we think is important for you all, for the administrative staff, and for the commissioners to review, to make sure that we're doing our due diligence. Overlake is doing the same. And we have a document review team. These are the folks on our side. They're going to do this initial review of these documents. Obviously, there will be reports coming back to the commission, but right now this is our team working on the review of the documents that Overlake provides. Overlake management has its own document review team, administrative team members, as well as I'm sure they'll have Ogden Murphy, Don Black, and some of his folks as well assisting on that process. So we've set up, actually the 2 law firms have each set up a SharePoint site. So all the documents get uploaded from our side and have been uploaded from our side. And so now Overlake and their document review, their due diligence review team has access to that SharePoint site. Now, so that those individuals, those specific individuals, and it's limited to their due diligence review team, can go onto that SharePoint site and see these documents that they requested in the first place. Steve and his team gave us the documents, we got them uploaded. They are in the process of doing the same thing on their side. I expect that we'll have their documents up for our team to take a look at beginning probably mid to end of next week, maybe a little longer, but I'm anticipating that. We also have clean rooms in each of these SharePoint sites, and a clean room, and I have to give credit to where credit is due, Steve. These were great slides. Steve put together this explanation, and it's spot on. A clean room is really a data sharing room or a data room within a data room. There are certain documents that generally should not be made available to the administrative team and the leadership team of each other's organization. One, sometimes there's just stuff that shouldn't be shared prior to really getting the thing effective, but part of it is from an antitrust perspective. There are certain things that competitors or neighboring organizations can't share, and so those documents go into the clean room, and then generally the legal counsel for each side puts together a report without some of the specific detail, so that if the deal ever falls through, we don't have any antitrust concerns related to this.
How is the board involved with seeing the data, or working with the data, or knowing about it?
Well, the clean room data will come in the form of a report from me, or if there's more of a financial end, it may come from the hospital's accounting firm. But the data that's not in the clean room will generally be reviewed by the due diligence team and report to the board, report to the commission.
Who's on the due diligence?
That's our due diligence team. So just like any other hospital reports coming to the commission, this will as well.
And then, Mr. Pollard, you'll see one of the first boxes. So when we come to these meetings, this will be a time that we'll bring up, here's what's come up into the due diligence and our review to make sure that you guys stay up to date on everything.
As I was saying, we've shared everything that Overlake's requested has been uploaded to the SharePoint site, so it's available for them to review. they have that access. Now, you might say, well, why don't we just give them copies of the documents? Why put it in SharePoint? I never like to give away documents. If for whatever reason the deal doesn't go through, I want to retain control of those documents. So they're in a SharePoint site. There's two things that we're waiting on, and we'd have them uploaded, but we don't have them yet. Our cost report and our audit report, which, as you can see, we're going to be receiving. You'll have it obviously as well, come to you. On these dates, once we have it, it'll get uploaded so they have access to it. Those are two particular items that I know that Overlake's anxious to see. The cost report, they're new to the whole critical access hospital concept, so they want to make sure they understand the cost report, what's involved in a cost report, what it looks like, what that means, and then as a natural sequence or flow, our audit report, and that just is a natural flow. So those are the two things that they have requested that we haven't uploaded, but only because we haven't received them yet. Once we receive them, we'll share them as well. And then, of course, as I mentioned, they're in the process of gathering the information that we requested and uploading it to their SharePoint, and then our due diligence team will have the opportunity to review it.
So we
Has
have
that
not
shared-
received any response as of yet.
That is correct.
This due diligence request.
That is correct. They're in the process of gathering. You really have two groups working on it. The actual data collection, for the most part, is done by the Overlake administrative people, and the setting up the SharePoint is actually done by their legal counsel. So once the SharePoint's up, that data will be uploaded by Overlake's administrative team to it. Their legal team will go through it and say, well, what needs to be in a clean room, what doesn't, and that'll get done. They will send us an email saying, our folks have access to their SharePoint, and then we'll be able to go in and look at it and review that document.
Is the document on SharePoint read-only or printable document?
Well, it's basically read-only. I mean,
Read-only,
that's
right?
my preference,
Yeah, that's what I was
because I don't want to, again, lose.
Right, because you mentioned you want to have that control.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. All right. As a part of the due diligence, this is kind of almost, I mean, it's a part of it, but it's kind of going unto itself. A common interest agreement, sometimes referred to as a joint defense agreement. On the offhand chance that there is something that's there that could be on either side, it may be a reportable sort of or legal reportable obligation, then we want to make sure that the attorneys from both sides can talk freely, so we have this common interest agreement. This document was, it was put together by Overlake's attorneys. We reviewed it. Skip, I think, looked at it as well. Everybody was comfortable with it, so it's been signed. It's been reviewed and signed by both administrative team and legal team. So once we get everything up, and then the time frame, I mean, let's see, yes, I'm sorry. This is one where I did not put a specific time frame, but the due diligence request, and that we expect to have that done by the end of the month. All right, so that process, getting everything requested, everybody uploading it to the SharePoint, we're shooting for the end of the month, and I think we're gonna be, well, we already got our stuff up, except for the two items we don't have, and we expect to have their stuff up by the end of the month. So, moving into the next phase, or the third task, is the actual due diligence review. I mean, so we're gonna take a look at the documents, we're gonna identify issues, they gotta be resolved prior to closing. I mean, two of the things that actually made the list as well as tasks are the issue with the bond and the bond approval, making sure that we can get that, the rent or the lease payments in essence being at 105% instead of 140%. And needing to get comfortable with critical access hospital status. Those would be two examples of issues that got to be resolved or waived prior to going to closing. So we identify that, and it helps us develop the definitive agreement. I mean, you know, there's stuff that may come up and we go, oh, well, we want to work this into it. So that's part of the whole process, just making sure we're aware and transparency between partners.
With respect to the critical access agreement, and so the federal government can change that at any time. And as a matter of fact, for 3 years, they tried to say that any hospital within 10 miles of another hospital could not maintain their critical access status. That kind of thing can come back, and it's not something we do, it's out of our control.
Correct.
And if that would be used as an excuse for exiting the program or canceling the obligations, we're in a vulnerable position, it seems to me.
Correct. Now, you know, all of this still comes out and gets worked into the affiliation agreement, but based on my conversation with Overlake's attorney is they are aware of that and they're comfortable with that. What they want to make sure is technically this area would qualify as rural in one respect, but it meets another CMS definition of rural, and they just want to make sure that they see some documentation. It's like, oh yeah, we've seen the survey results, we see what they're basing it on, we're comfortable with that. So the fact that the program might change in the future, they seem fine with. They just want to make sure they get their arms around what the rural, how that's proven or established for certification process. So as I understand it, we've gone through 2 surveys, you know, since the government put more of a focus on that, and we've been approved both times.
And they're not challenging it, they just want to see how we are defined as rural so that they have that in their hands as part of the future.
The way the law defines it is any city any area, catchment area, that does not have a city of 75,000 or more is rural.
So they're aware of that, but there are a discrete set of criteria, and they just want to know which one was used for us. So they are very well aware of all the different ways that you can do it, so they're not uneducated on this. They just want to know which one the DOH used for us. So it's a fact-finding mission, or a historical document finding mission.
That's good if we were informed as well.
I would love to know as well, yeah.
All right, so this review process, we're really shooting to get this done by July 15th. Actually, I'd love to get it done sooner, but you know, again, we really need to have this kind of resolved because we need, all this starts to be timeframes looking towards getting an application filed in connection with the certificate of need process, so we can get that process done, if possible, by the end of the year, so that we can get this wrapped up and finished. And so we need to drive some of these things, and that's the target date for this particular task. Resolution, we talked a little bit about this, but I mean, obviously, we need to make sure that the bond covenants and the required payment amount, the impact on the structure of the arrangement, the approval of the bondholders. This, as I mentioned, is actually kind of a subtask of the due diligence review. We're shooting here for May 31st, and you know, I think based on our last conversation, that's still a doable target. And then, as we were just talking about the critical access hospital status, as Dr. Whitcup pointed out, what they're really looking for is documentation on that one particular issue. And I think we're well on our way to doing that. Target completion date was the 31st of July. That was more because that's kind of when we need really want to get that application for CON filed by the end of July. we built in some flex that maybe we get it filed the middle of September, but we would really like to get it done in July.
Well, that first sentence is what I'm concerned about. It's not asking what our status is now. It's saying the continuation of our status is required by overlay. That's out of our hands.
No, it's, as Dr. Whipcup pointed out, that's exactly what I've heard as well. What they just want to know is they've seen the survey results, they understand we were approved, they just want to know on what basis they were relying. And so, they're aware that, you know, nothing's forever and it can change, but that's not what's worrying them. They just want reassurance that we've got that issue and we can just provide, or DOH can provide that documentation. The affiliation agreement, as you're aware from the letter of intent talks about a number of, well, it uses the term definitive agreements, plural. And in my mind, there's really three maybe, depending on whether we can assign some current leases or whether we can have one lease that covers both the equipment and the facilities, or we need two leases. I mean, some of those things we'll have to iron out. But this is kind of the master of the definitive agreement. It is the affiliation agreement. It establishes the structure of the affiliation, description of the other definitive agreements like the lease of the facilities, the lease of the equipment, the trust agreement, the conditions to closing, what has to be met, and really the whole process for how the affiliation is going to roll out. So we need the affiliation agreement in order to file the certificate of need application. Well, technically, we could file the application with a description, but when they send back in 30 to 60 days, I'd have to go back and look to make sure which time frame it is. There is going to be a request for information, and they would want to see a copy of it by that time frame. So again, this is one of those things that we need to get done based on our conversations with Overlake. When we had the whole group together, I shouldn't put this, made it sound like it was them, but all of us together said, well, this is kind of the last date we'd like to file by. We'd really like to get it done by July 15th or the end of July, but this is, guys, we got to get it done no later than this. So, you know, we need to get the affiliation agreement done because if we file the application on the CON, we don't file this with it, but give it to them on the request for information, we really want to nail down by the 15th of September.
What is meant by other definitive agreements?
The other definitive agreements would be the agreement by which they lease, Overlake leases from the district, the facilities and the equipment, and also the trust agreement. Those are the three other definitive agreements.
Okay, let's just say, let's just assume that we missed the deadline, CON. Is there an extension that is allowable?
Yeah, think of it as a 6 to 12 month period. If you start it in July, you go forward 9 months, that's when we can close the deal. If we don't get it filed until September, we just extended it 2 months on the front end, so it extends it. So it's not like a deadline we miss.
Okay.
It just moves the whole thing, and that's what I want to avoid.
And what's the advantage of waiting?
Well,
Cost.
Delay and cost.
cost of it is part of it. Part of it is, you know, sometimes affiliations, if they drag on too long, people lose interest.
You don't have
Part of it is there's this new legislation that would require the Attorney General's approval. Proposed effective date for that is 1/1/20. If we can get it done beforehand, because we will, if we don't and we end up closing, go back to this, and you see it goes out to May, and that's mostly driven by the CON timeline. Well, we would be one of the first ones, if this legislation actually becomes law, we'd probably be one of the first ones. So the AG's office wouldn't have any process, they probably wouldn't have any criteria.
Forever.
It'll be the guinea pig.
That would be my word.
So you're saying that has not become law?
It has not.
And so is it?
It will on January first.
Well, it's only passed the House at this
Okay.
point.
Okay.
So-
rules right now.
It's in the Senate and
The rules
it,
today, it's most likely gonna come out, it looks like I
It won't be
listened to
dead,
testimony.
dead on arrival.
No, but then it would take effect 90 days after signing, and then it would not have an effective date for implementation until January 1,
Right.
2020.
so,
And
You know that-
you're right, the Attorney General's office will
Bill.
take a year to put criteria.
yes, I do.
Time is of the essence.
Looking for a bill number, Brian?
Yeah, that's what Commissioner Powell just asked for. I have it.
It's 1607.
Okay.
It's,
HB, SB,
it's actually,
So it's House Bill 1607?
1607 or SB?
it's substitute House Bill
Substitute.
1607.
Yep.
And I've got a copy if you want to make copies for you.
What's the number? 1607.
1607,
1607.
substitute House Bill 1607.
Substitute.
It's a very, very broad statute. It arguably would apply to any health system acquiring a physician group of 7 or more.
What's the title of that?
The title is an act relating to notice of material changes to the operations of governance, structures, and participants in the healthcare marketplace.
Relating to, okay, marketplace, whatever.
But anyways, so that would be one of the reasons for trying to move this.
Send me an electronic
I
copy.
had said when I brought up the
Thank you.
certificate of need issues. That, I didn't mean to, really didn't mean to say anything. This is the reason I brought that up, because if we did get to wait
Right,
longer than anticipated,
yeah.
we may have.
Well, you know, based on other affiliations, like Island County attempt, the one up in Snohomish County, and all of that, these things can go on for 3 years.
We don't want that.
But do we want that? That's why time is of the essence. We
I'm not
need to
suggesting
move
to
on.
go on 3 years, but
No.
just as a matter of fact, if you look at affiliations, how long these things take. And you could look at Yakima and Virginia Mason and other affiliations, they take longer than you think. I'm surprised at the time frames that you have here.
Well, I mean, keep in mind, you've been working on this already over
For
a year.
more than that.
You know, so, I mean, this time frame is not overly aggressive, not given where you are already and how far you've already, you've already had discussion.
The planning process started September 2016.
All right, I wasn't even aware of that, I just knew that they'd been going on for some time. So, town hall meetings, all right, so this kind of got to some of the discussion there. This actually is task or project number 7 because it needs to happen. Now, my preference, this is my recommendation, not anybody else's, is that we wait till we're 85 to 95% done with the affiliation agreement. And I don't do that because I want to exclude transparency or involvement. It's just the one thing that I hate in doing these is standing in front of a public group going, well, what's it gonna look like? Well, could be this, or it could be that, or it might be this.
Yeah.
This gives me the ability to go, here's how it's structured. Now, if somebody says, well, wait a second, that's a problem, well, all right, well, we can have that discussion. It won't be finalized, it won't be signed or approved by the commission or the board, it won't be signed by anybody, but it's something there that I've got an answer. When somebody says, how is this gonna work? I could say, here's how it's gonna work, and if somebody says, well, that's bad because of this, this, and this, well, then we can consider it. But on the other hand, if I just say, it might look like this, it might look like this, it might look like that, then we spend a lot of time just doing this.
Everybody giving their opinions of
And that's good, I don't mind that, but we can still get everybody's opinion here. To me, the key is, you gotta have something to tell people, to give them, but you can't be done. Because for all the points that you made, you can't be done. Because then people go, well, wow, nobody cares what I think.
Well, yes, taxation without representation, they didn't take into account the public views on this.
Well, they have you, so they have taxation with representation.
Yeah, there you go.
But,
Well,
That's it.
I'm sorry, I'm kidding with you.
That's true.
The point is, they will have a chance to see it, understand it, when we can actually give them something to understand and something to respond to.
Now, some members of the public have suggested that there be an advisory vote as to whether to do this affiliation at all. And maybe it's at that point that it should be called an advisory vote for those people.
Well,
Have you ever been involved in a process where there has been an advisory vote?
no, I mean, realistically, what they've done is they've already elected the advisory committee. You all
Yes.
sitting around the table of the advisory committee. And so, you know, you're the ones that are involved in the whole process. You're the ones that were involved in putting together the letter of intent. And so you're speaking for them. I think it's important for all the reasons you pointed out. I mean, if the local newspaper, if people aren't even aware exactly what's going on, it's people never like to be surprised. So, you know, if we can give them this, and again, I have to have, I think, something to give them. And so I'll usually go for the 85 to 95% complete, because then we got some pretty solid ideas and we can answer questions. And if something comes up that we haven't thought about, well, we can think about it and address it. But also the CON application. I think it needs to be somewhere right before or right after that CON application goes in, because the CON application includes a description of the arrangement. And the last thing I want to do is have an application go in, and then 6 months later we're having a discussion, a town hall meeting. Well, it's like, well, it's already in the process, it's a done deal. Even though it wouldn't necessarily be a done deal, it'll create the impression it's a done deal, and that's what I want to avoid. So I always shoot for right before, right after, you know, and if we can line things up before is better, you know. That's just my feeling. So, you know, I don't know if well, I mean, obviously you as commissioners have to set the time for when we actually have the town hall meeting. But when I propose it, when I give you a specific time frame, it's tied to that reasoning and that logic. You know, if we're able to get, it looks like we're gonna get the affiliation agreement and the CON application done in July or August, you know, then we ought to have the town hall meetings June, July. If it looks like it's gonna be more August, September, then we have them July or August. You know, have them close, because we got everything done, but we're not set in stone yet. Of course, if for whatever reason there's a big delay, I want to have it that 85, 95% done. So if for some reason we get something and there's a delay in getting those documents done, we don't get them done, we want them done in July or August or September, we don't get them done to October, well, we delay having the town hall meeting till we get to that point where we have something to say. That's my recommendation. Once we've gone through everything up to this point, some of it is, because this is laid out in my mind in a task basis, not necessarily completely sequential. We're kind of sequential up to this point, and then we kind of jump back a little bit here with some of these things. They tie in, but this to me is still sequential. I mean, we've gone through the due diligence, we've gone through drafting and negotiating the affiliation agreement, we've gone through the town hall meetings. Now we get to the point where we have final approval by the commission, the board, and signature. And again, some of the time frames here, some of the time frames that are on here for signature, which are September, October, November, reflects the fact that Overlake Board only meets every other month. And, you know, I mean, ultimately, it's this commission and the board of Overlake that make the final sign-off. So we can start the CON process before this, but this is the target dates. I personally like to see September, just because I want to keep things moving.
And also, you're more likely to have an audience. If you give a town hall meeting and nobody shows up, that's very destructive.
Well, it's very discouraging too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think you have to kind of skip July and August and wait till school starts and things get back.
Well, again, my only problem with that is if we skip that and wait till September and then we're moving forward with the process.
Okay, go ahead, but I'm just telling you, if people won't show, they're not gonna be here.
Ultimately, that's up for you all to decide when we have the meeting. This is my recommendation on why we have it, when we have it. So, this starts to get into some of the things that just needs to get done, assignment and assumption of licenses, provider numbers. There are a whole raft of things the hospital has. They have provider agreements with various insurance companies. They have licenses. They have licenses, not just the hospital license, but there's CLIA licenses and certification for the lab. There's radiation requirements for the X-ray. All of those things we need to make sure that we get transferred, assigned, and taken care of. So target completion date, because in my mind, the ideal completion date for the whole deal is to get it done by the end of the year. If we can get it done by 12/31, I think that's ideal. Certificate of need application, and this is the one, one of these lines that has variations in the shading, and it's because it's really a four-step process. First, we got to submit that letter of intent. That is the letter of intent, not the one we signed before, but our letter of intent to submit a CON application. Then prepare and submit the CON application, respond to requests for additional information, and then CON Commission reviews and approves it. So target date for the letter of intent is June, by the end of June. Application, again, these are kind of the outside. If you look here, I gave us some fudge. So maybe it's a 2-month period because it's just the way I'm wired. In my heart of hearts, I'd rather get stuff done sooner rather than later. But the outside deadlines are for the letter of intent by June 30th and the application by September 30th. Those, if we go out that long, it looks like we may be waiting until May to actually get our CON approval. And that's just because there's a backlog at the CON Commission and their review. There's set timeframes that they are intended to follow, but if you just get swamped, and my understanding is they are swamped, there's a backlog. And so this is why, because of that backlog that may push us out to May of next year, almost halfway into the year, that's why I'm really pushing to get stuff done up front. Again, I'm pushing, but I don't drive the show. It's my recommendation, it's the parties, it's the boards, it's the administrative team on both sides. So I don't want you to feel like I'm just, the taskmaster with, the whip in a chair moving everybody along, but it's kind of like, let's stay on task, people, so we get this done. I need to make that clear. This is our goals. This is to keep us on task and to get us done. I put this together with everybody's input, but this is yours. And if it changes, I say yours, it's yours and Overlake's together, because it's got to be both. My recommendation is we try and stick to these unless something comes up that we can't get around. But ultimately that's not my decision.
Yeah, I don't suppose you could make this larger or easier to read than the next one.
Actually, I think in part it depends on the printer. If you have a printer that can print, because I understand exactly what you're saying. When I have mine printed out at the office, it's like this.
Well, we could use legal size paper, for example, and it would be larger. But a saving grace is that if you look at like item 11, it happens to be on page 19, where it's formation of NUCO, then if you come back here to affiliation task, you can read it.
Yes.
It's just that this would be really handy if it were a little more readable.
Yes, I will try and make sure that happens.
That is what I sent you in the email. So
Yeah.
on your computer screen, you can blow it up.
Maybe I can blow it up.
All right, so certificate of need, this is the thing that is kind of what we need to keep in mind and keep focused on, because this is going to delay us more than anything else.
Yeah.
Now, formation, there's, I put these all together. I figured by this time in our discussion, you'd be tired of hearing my detail. So we compress this now. Obviously, we're gonna get into this in more detail in future meetings, but a lot of this is really all on the Overlake side, because NUCO is their entity. They're gonna form it. It's gonna be a subsidiary of Overlake. So, but we have timelines that are tracking to keep everything else moving to make sure these get done, because we need this in place before we file the application for the CON. And so that's why you see this July 31st deadline come up. They are going to submit a Form 1023, which is requesting that this new entity be 501c3 tax exempt. That, in my experience, takes 6 to 9 months after you get the application submitted. So I have gotten it back in 30 days or less. I know. I was shocked as well when it came back that quick, that particular one. But it was kind of a lay down winner. I mean, it was a support organization for a hospital, so it was kind of an almost a gimme. But I can see by the look on your face,
I've never seen anything like that.
This says seat the NUCO board of directors. There's nothing said about elect NUCO board of directors. Who appoints the board of directors?
that will be Overlake.
Overlake appoints them, we have nothing to do with that?
Correct, because they're responsible under the letter of intent for operations. And so this is the entity that's gonna be operating. It doesn't relieve this board of any of its, or this commission of any of its existing authority whatsoever. It just, this is the entity that's gonna do the operations under the letter of intent.
Will that include members of their board, their current board, or is this?
No, I don't know for sure, because I haven't asked that question. My expectation is that it will probably have members of their administrative team, like somebody from the C-suite, the chief operating officer, the CEO, the CFO on it, and then community members. That would be my expectation, but I haven't asked. And ultimately, that's going to be their call.
Wouldn't, don't they need to start the approval process right now for this? I mean,
I have
8 months out.
suggested that maybe they need to start that process.
I mean, they need to do this right now. It's 8.5 months out to the end of the year.
I have suggested that they may need to start that process. Yes.
Do they know what will happen if we'll get it done by the end of the year?
Well, there's nothing to say that they have to have 501c3 status by the time we make this official. It just means that they have tax. So I think that part of the reason that they maybe haven't done this yet is I think their legal counsel feels like it'll be less than 6 to 9 months. I think he's believing it's gonna be more like 3 to 6 months. And so, you know how lawyers are.
Yeah.
You can only tell them so much.
The fact that
Ask us.
Overlake is right now 501c3 organization.
I believe so.
That's my understanding. Now, can't they carry that over to this new organization?
Each entity has to have.
They have their own 501.
Yeah, 501c3,
Okay, so there's a separate entity.
Yes.
Alright.
Have I mentioned that I stressed that they might want to think about doing that? Okay. All right, so these are the 16 through 18. These are the two to three other definitive agreements. This is the lease of the facilities, the space, the hospital building, the lease of the equipment, and that trust agreement with regard that's in the letter of intent. So these are the remaining definitive agreements. We also need these for the CON application because they describe and document what the transaction's gonna be. So again, we wanna get these done as soon as possible, but not later than September 15th. Because all of our employees are gonna become employees of Overlake, there are these issues. These are probably minor things, but again, I don't like, these are the sorts of things that sometimes come back to be a problem if they fall off the table and nobody thinks about them until right before closing, and then some employee at an employee meeting goes, what does this mean to my 401k? And everybody goes, oh crud, we haven't thought about that. Don't want that to happen.
Well, employee insurance is going to be an issue. Because that runs year to year, and we make a change before the end of the year and don't go out to bid and all that, it could be an issue for employees.
Well, that's why I have, even though my earliest hopeful closing date is December 31st, that's why we got this getting it done by the end of November. Because I want it taken care of up front. Because at some point, in addition to town hall meetings, we're gonna need to have hospital town hall meetings, or at least that, I'm sorry, I don't wanna get into talking about what your communication plan for the hospital folks are, but at some point there needs to be that, so I just didn't wanna lose track of this, so I put it on the list. Same thing with medical staff credentialing, because NUCO is a new entity, it's actually gonna have a new medical staff, and we're gonna have everything that you all do for credentialing your medical staff. You're on the medical staff, here's your privileges to do this. NUCO's gotta do that. Again, not a big deal, it'll go smoothly, but I just wanna make sure we don't lose track of it.
Question, since they are gonna be running operations, right now, currently, the board members, board commissioners are members of a medical committee, several different committees. Will this still apply to Overlake once they take over?
Probably not.
So they'll have their own, and they'll have their own board of directors sitting in those committees?
Correct. Well, keep in mind on the medical staff credentialing part in particular, state and federal law says it's the board of the entity that operates the hospital that has the legal obligation for making sure that they are qualified medical staff.
I understand.
Okay.
But because this is also a public hospital, so the elected commissioners ought to be involved to find out what's happening as well. Part of our fiduciary responsibility, don't you think that would be something that should be?
Well, but the letter of intent goes to the operations are moving to the Overlake entities, NUCO that's being formed. And so that's, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So then maybe we're having Skip just walk through the distinction between a public hospital district and the obligation of the district,
Yeah.
separate and distinct from operating a hospital, if you don't mind. Can I put that on the spot?
So basically, the public hospital district under your statute will be responsible for setting, in essence, the revenue or budget requirements, so you collect taxes. That's an obligation that you can't transfer or assign. You'll vote on that, you'll get that approved and processed on an annual basis like you always do. That's one of your main fiduciary duties and obligations. The other is that you can hire and appoint superintendents over that or other parts of affiliations. But once you sign a letter of intent, as Brian's been talking about, you've transferred that obligation in a sense to operate the hospital by having that operation done by Overlake. And they will set the committees, they will hire the doctors, they'll credential them, they'll manage and maintain that. but you'll have these written agreements with them, contracts, leases, etc., that you'll be able to continue to monitor. You will still have a function within the community. You'll be elected on regular schedules, you'll serve the public, and you can then do different outreach things. But you won't be involved in that operations day-to-day piece, other than the fact that you approve the superintendent of the hospital.
So it's still.
We no longer have the oversight.
You don't have that oversight because you've transferred that oversight under an operational agreement. You've now transferred that authority and ability for them to manage it by that agreement that you entered into. You're gonna operate your hospital under that agreement.
So we're washing our hands, huh?
You're not washing your hands, you still have the oversight, you still have that agreement. You're gonna put terms in there that says if they don't comply, if they don't follow regulations, state laws, federal laws, that you'll come in and you'll void the agreement. You'll say you're breaching the terms of the agreement, you'll ask that you void and you'll pull out. In essence, you'll ask them to leave.
Okay,
So
that's the definitive agreement, which is
Correct.
So that basically means that we're gonna have to at least still meet a month, every month, to at least say how things going and have conversations.
Statute requires you still to adopt meetings and to meet and to publish those and have the public
So
be
they
available
know
to
that
represent.
we are somewhat involved.
The Open Public Meetings Act will still apply, Public Records Law will still apply, all the PDC requirements will still apply, all those will still apply to you,
to us.
They will not apply to overlay.
Not specifically, there's some pieces that will still apply, but not specifically to how they operate.
Clarify that.
Not to call it up.
Because as a private hospital, they don't comply with the Open Public Meetings Act, the Public Records Act.
Correct.
But if this entity here that they're running, as opposed to the hospital in Bellevue, but this is what they're gonna have to where the public records would count, isn't it? No?
Is there anything that prevents our board from having committees? One could be an education committee, public education committee.
Nothing at all, your bylaws allow you to create
And
committees.
You would have
Yeah,
a medical
that's-
committee, but not to direct the medical staff. But it could be there could be a medical, the facilities committee, the medical committee.
Well, you've handed off the facilities and management to another organization, so I don't know why you'd want to have a facilities committee, but you could have an outreach committee, an education committee, community affairs committee, publicity committee, your foundation could still exist. But I'm not sure why you'd want to have operational committees per se.
Well, not operational, but the property still belongs to the district.
You're leasing your property,
You're
correct?
leasing.
You're still on it.
But we still should have oversight of what's being done under lease with our property.
You potentially could do that, that's true.
Could a commissioner, elected commissioner become a member of the operational committee for overlay? Can they be invited to participate and join? Or should this be included in the definitive agreement?
Well, that would be up to overlay. They're gonna set their boards. There are some affiliations wherein they've taken a public hospital district commissioner and put them on one of their boards.
Right.
Then they take some of their other board members and put them on another board, oversight board.
It's like
So
the-
it'll be their makeup, as Brian said, they'll make that determination. Typically, it's C-suite officers, it's others, community members, but they could. It's not precluded.
It came over to me just yesterday that the hospital in Friday Harbor, San Juan County, is operating exactly like we have idealized here. And so when we're in Michigan conference, it might be good to find time to talk to those commissioners.
Which also the,
Friday Harbor.
Friday Harbor.
also the Monroe Group and Evergreen, they have
That
the,
is not.
I know it's different, but they do have two sets of board of directors and each one have their own commissioners on.
That's why I say
You know,
it's constructed,
Right, right.
not at all like what we're talking about.
Right, well, I was just wondering
So it's
whether
not-
that is.
Yeah, it's not
That is
an
a-
example of what's being conceived here, but the one in Island is.
Friday Harbor.
Island County Public Hospital District number 2.
Of Island.
Island County.
What was that?
I think it's
Island County.
Island County
District
Public
number two.
Hospital District number 2.
Yeah.
There's already one pre-existing, one was Public Hospital District 1. This is the second one.
Thank you.
And I looked at it some time ago and found that it might look familiar, and so it might work. Yeah, I can try to get some more information on that too, and I'll get that to Valerie to email that to you.
Thank you, just.
At least how they're structured. They had called me because they wanted to do bylaws. I told them it was too far to drive, I'd already gone through that for a year.
Yeah. Already did
1
that.
year of bylaws.
I said that was enough.
All right, so survey and certification, I mean, one of the key things, I actually broke this out from earlier up when we talked about licenses. This I put in its own category because in order for them to be a critical access hospital, they have to file these CMS Form 855s in order to assume our provider agreement and our provider numbers and basically our critical access hospital status. Now, unfortunately, you can't file the forms more than 60 days before it actually takes effect. So, but you can actually draft them and have them ready to go, which is really what I want to have happen, because as soon as we know that it looks like we're going to be ready to go, the CON is approved, we're ready to move to closing, I want them ready to file. And that's important. They're going to be very anxious on that because that's how they get paid by Medicare. So they are going to be anxious to do that as well. And then the last is, Valhalla, the Holy Grail, whatever metaphor or euphemism you want to use, actually getting the closing done. So my goal, as I've talked about, for the reasons that I talked about, would be December 31, but it's looking more like it might be May. Again, I'm always optimistic, so move forward and go from there. So, any other questions?
Could you go back to the previous slide?
Yeah.
Okay, now, the assumption of our critical access hospital certification is only for NUCO.
Correct.
So it doesn't affect Overlake in any way.
Correct. That is how it's structured, is that NUCO is going to be the hospital, and it's going to have a license in the critical access hospital certification.
Thank you.
No problem. Well, thanks, everyone. So I'm curious, did that give kind of a good overview to start with, so that when we follow this in the future?
Everyone bring this along.
Yes, yeah. Don't leave that at home.
So, good. So we can ask questions where we are.
So now does the agenda make more sense? So each time we come together for this session, we'll have all these boxes to kind of hit on track.
Are there any other questions that need to be asked by anybody? Hearing none, I guess we adjourn.